All right. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Rob Bennington from the University of California Cooperative Extension, Bay Area Urban Agricultural Advisor. He supports small-scale food growers while extending knowledge on urban soil quality and resource management with urban agricultural policy. Rob teaches on urban soil management and heavy metals exposure prevention and works with local groups on mapping urban food growing sites in the East San Francisco Bay Area and specializes in providing technical assistance on urban agricultural community garden site governance. And so without further delay, I want to thank everybody for your patience. And this is Mr. Rob Bennington. Rob, can you say something? I'm not sure if I can hear you. Okay, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties. Stay with us for a few moments while we work this out. Okay, we are having some technical difficulties with our audio. Let's see. Actually, Joy, while we are waiting for our speaker to switch computers and log back on, is it possible to launch the pre-poll that is in conjunction with his topic? That way we can have our attendees at least do the pre-poll. Great. And so with this poll, we just want to get an idea of your experience with any type of soil contamination and risk management. So basically each question wants to know, do you have non-existent experience, minimal experience, moderate experience, or considerable experience with the subject matter that it's being asked? And so if we can just have attendees fill out the poll while we're waiting, that would be great. And that just gives us an idea of how much knowledge you're coming in with, so that we can cater some of the questions to the areas where participants aren't as well knowledgeable about certain subjects. And if you're familiar with some of the subjects, we can kind of just roll through those sections. All right, let's give the poll a couple more seconds. I see that our speaker is connecting now to audio. All right, and Joy, do we have the results from the pre-poll?
Huh.
Right, so I'll just go through the results while Rob is coming back on. And so it looks like, as far as the attendees are concerned, we've got a good mix of people that have a little bit of knowledge and some that are pretty considerably knowledgeable. So that's a really good mix. That gives Rob a good idea of what areas to really focus on.
All right. Thank you, Captain. I think I'm good.
Yeah, we're going over the results of the poll. So we've got a really good mix of participants here that some
1 second.
minimal knowledge and some who are here to learn a lot, and some who really just want some tips and tricks. All right, so let's go ahead and see if we can relaunch, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The video.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. I'm so sorry about that. So I am pulling up the PowerPoint as we speak. I switched computers and we are getting ready to rock and roll. So give me a hot second. And so good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry we're delayed, and this is going to be a fun little fly through. So I'm going to ask everybody if you can please take your right hand, put it on your left shoulder, and then fasten your seatbelt, because we're going to go for a ride on soils. Okay. And here we go. Let me just move this to be able to show the slideshow itself. And again, sorry about the delayed start here. All right. So we should have it any second. There we go. All right. All right. So again, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for delays and for technical difficulties here. I'm so happy to be here with you today. It's nice to have 10 people on the call for Lead Week. And so the long version of this webinar, I would sometimes call Safe Soils or Soil Sampling and Exposure Prevention in Urban Ag. And how come I can't go down? Hang on. There we go. We had a drag. Okay. So the key thing here is we're trying to understand soil quality to really assess whether there's risks in our soils by growing produce in it, and ultimately to manage our soils to grow food, and farm safely. That's the bottom line goal, right? And so we're here today to learn about soil testing and best practices to really make some informed decisions and reduce risks of soil contaminant exposure when there's lead or other soil contaminants in the soils. And we won't know by testing. So the first key thing to know really is to everybody, please just repeat after me if it's okay with you. Don't guess, test, right? Don't guess, but actually get your soil tested. Send it to a soil lab. We're going to cover the hows and whys of all of that right now. So why should you care about your soil, right? Soil quality is really important in terms of how your crops grow, so you can get bountiful blossoms and healthy harvests. At the end of the day, your health in part relies on the soil in which you grow. And you're in your garden or farm or community garden or school garden or faith-based or therapeutic site often enough that the extent and concentration of the soil quality can affect you a little bit at a time. So it's the key thing to get your soil tested just to start off, right? Some soils are easy to improve on, others are harder based on what the history of the site is. What was it before? What was the land use before? Was it a gas station, a dry cleaner, a industrial area, a 3 a.m. dumping ground in what used to be a rural community, but is now urbanized because the city or the metropolitan region has grown over time. So don't guess, test, right? It's plants grow best in proper nutrient, structural, and soil composition. But we want to understand if there's soil health risks to deal with, work with, manage, right? So soil quality very much affects human and plant health. You want to manage risk even in the process of soil testing. So when taking your samples, you may want to think about wearing gloves. If it's a windy day, wearing a mask, maybe eyeglasses, or at least sunglasses. And then home tests versus lab tests are different. Lab tests ultimately lab tests ultimately will give you greater test results, whereas home tests will give you some level of understanding on your urban soils, your lead, whatever else you may have, but it won't give you the whole story. This is one of the key considerations. And so do-it-your-home tests can be helpful to get some basic information, but ultimately lab tests provide some reliability and precision that you wouldn't get in basic home tests, right? So think about where soil contaminants may be a concern. Are they a concern in urban agriculture farms, in community garden sites, residential properties? Contaminants could be at low levels that are allowable for human or plant health, but you don't know unless you actually know, right? So the other piece is some agricultural land, some sites where historically pesticides were sprayed may also have soil contaminant concerns as well. So those contaminants can affect human and plant health. They can ultimately affect your children and your elders' health as well, but it's all based on the site history. The possibility of soil risks are a key consideration in all of this, right? So how does one get exposed to soils where there are contaminant concerns? Well, different kinds of materials are different sources for soil contaminants. If you were born and or raised before 1978, if your property was built on before 1978, you may have lead in the soil from housing developments that were burned, or from paint or pipes that had lead in them. If your site is a high traffic space where there are lots of cars flying by frequently, or near a highway, in places like the MacArthur Exchange in the Bay Area, in Oakland, for example, where there's lots of concentrations of traffic, right? Or multiple highways that come together, the potential for lead or zinc or what are called PAHs is real, right? Anybody ever remember the movie Mary Poppins, right? The pHs stand for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So if we were all together in a room doing this workshop in person, I would ask you to say that slowly. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. PAHs generally come from vehicle uses, solvents, various kinds of petro sources like fossil fuel burning, and also burning wastes. PAHs are also part of petroleum spills. We're talking about the simpler versions being benzene, toluene, and xylene right here, right? That ENE, that's relevant when you have a double carbon bond. That means that you have some strength in that bond. And ultimately, when you start to see the ENE, that's where you want to be a little bit more concerned if you get test results back with the benzene, toluene, xylene, or any other of the test results that have an ENE in it. You have sewage concerns, like where you might have cadmium or copper, right? Pesticides, sites that were historically farm spaces where there might have been lead or arsenic or mercury in the pesticides. And so there's a variety of sources. It's important not to use treated lumber if you're growing produce in planter boxes, to use untreated lumber, because the treated lumber tends to be treated with chemicals that also have arsenic, chromium, and copper. These are heavy metals that can get into your system and affect your health over time, right? So these are some common contaminant sources in our lives, in our everyday existence, and especially in urban areas. And so, why are contaminants a concern in urban areas? They can affect our plant growth, they can affect our human health. They are in the soil for a long term, and they persist without us knowing. We can't really see them. They're kind of invisible, right? They're not visible to the naked eye. And so heavy metals coming especially off of older homes where there was lead in paint or in the pipes, right? May be a source of concern in some cases, right? Not every case. It depends on how the site was managed over long periods of time. But in the case where you have chipping paint off of older homes that were built before the late 70s, early 80s, and painted with lead paint, that chipping paint can become lead dust. And is also tending to be released when you have friction on windows and doors and exterior preparation work. And then the other thing is, kids like to chew stuff. So whatever's in their ambient environment, they may be, chewing on. So keeping that in mind as well, if you have kids in your family, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, etc. And also knowing that, in low-income areas, there has been at times a history of property owners actually experiencing arson in their communities. We used to, if you were around in the 70s, I used to hear when they were talking, during the World Series in the Yankees games, about how the Bronx in New York City was burning, because what would happen was lots of properties were being set on fire, and sometimes the value of the property was considered so low because so much rehabilitation work had to be done because of the lead issue, that it became a concern. On the other side of that, if a property burned that was built that long ago, the odds are that it was actually, if it was burned, that the lead went into the soil right then and there. Bare soil in yard spaces can be a concern also, from the house paint then chipping or landing in that soil. And then the use of leaded gasoline, if your property or site or urban farm, community garden, faith-based therapeutic or school garden site is near a highway, was there leaded gasoline being used for vehicles to run, right? And was that released? And is there a concentration of lead there? Taking home lead dust from construction work or from the yard space is kind of easy to do. Anybody here have pets, right? If you have pets, do they run around in the yard? Do they dig in the soil? Do they roll around in the dirt, right? Are they coming into your home afterwards or at night? Where do they sleep? Do they sleep with you? Do they roll around on the carpet in your living room? Do your grandchildren roll around on that same carpet in your living room? Or children, right? And so actually thinking about all of this from a pathway perspective as exposure pathways is a really key thing to think about, right? So hands, are you touching soils or plants in your yard or farm or garden space where there were low levels of contaminants in the past? What is the pathway, right? Are you taking those plants and putting them near your mouth? Are you smoking in the garden or farm space, taking that cigarette butt now with soiled hands and putting it near your mouth and then inhaling because you're breathing air, right? So eating lead containing soil or paint dust on unwashed produce or eating produce that has lead uptake can be a concern. How is lead uptaken? What are the pathways, right? Again, putting soiled hands or soiled materials near your face, where even a drink container like a coffee cup, right, where you're taking that and putting it near your face as you're drinking your coffee, you have the potential for inhaling micro amounts of soil lead. And it may or may not be a concern. It's all about getting your soil tested and knowing what your lead levels are, right? But lead in soils in particular is just one of many heavy metals like copper and chromium, arsenic and nickel and cadmium, right? And many more. But that's just one example of a soil contaminant that can affect your children's brain health, your children's behavior. It can cause iron deficiency and anemia. It can cause kidneys and reproductive health in birthing mothers, pregnant mothers. It can actually cross the placenta into the fetus, and it interferes ultimately with calcium uptake and affects growth and dental health as well. So children and elders are the most at risk. What are the pathways for human exposure, right? Soil dust and ingestion, skin eye contact, inhalation, right, is the biggest one. And then bare feet from the garden to the home, where you're then exposed in micro amounts or small amounts of soil dust, right? So who is impacted the most? Again, humans, in terms of humans, it's children and seniors the most. Your pets may actually bring in contaminants from the soil that you may not be aware of in low amounts if they are present in the soil, but it's all based on the contaminant concentration. So it all depends, right? And it may even vary across your yard space, right? One of the things we covered in the last workshop was that yard spaces across small areas can have different soil quality. And then how is it uptaken, right? Well, the good news is if you've got fruit trees or shrubs, for the most part, they are not likely to uptake through the roots, but soil dust is a concern. So keeping your soil covered is the key. Knowing that if you have soil contaminants, planting leafy greens or root crops into the local soil without importing fresh soil and building upward may be a concern, right? Could cause exposure if you're consuming those vegetables. You won't know until you get your soil tested. So knowing that lab tests will give you results that are not necessarily visible to the naked eye is key. Washing your produce is key. We're going to cover some of the best practices on how to do that very well. If contaminants are found and they're at low levels, how do you manage your soils? Well, it's important to follow best management practices based on the soil test results that you get. So test your soils, right? Don't guess, do your research, test your soils, don't guess, test. Do soil testing and investigate. Learn about your site's history. What was it before? Was it a junkyard? Was it an automobile area? Was it a car sales dealership where they were changing the oil on the site? What are the practices to follow? So here you want to build up instead of necessarily digging into the soil. Buy Organic Materials Review Institute soils or compost so that you can improve your soil with those resources and not introduce additional concerns. You want to test your soils at the very least for nutrients and lead and pH, soil pH, to make sure that you have less than 80 parts per million in California. The threshold for lead has changed, right? In the federal government, it was historically 400 parts per million, but for a long time now, it's been 80 parts per million in California. But recently the Fed reduced down to like a 200 parts per million range, right? So keep that in mind, that the soil science is still evolving in this work too, through research. And then wear gloves and practice good hygiene, right? Think about getting a boot brush that you staple down, that you actually bolt down to the ground outside of your yard space door when you enter the home, or as you leave the community garden or urban farm or school or faith-based or therapeutic site, so that you can get some of those soil particles off of your boots so you don't track them into your home. Don't let kids play in gardens or farm spaces that have soil test results of greater than 80 parts per million of lead in particular. And then ultimately, right, build raised beds, import clean soils, and make and use compost. Amend with compost and organic matter regularly every time you're planting or harvesting. Bind with soil contaminants. Organic material will bind with soil contaminants, especially those organic composts that have lots of phosphorus. So those are manure-based compost, herbivore manure-based compost. Also, amending with organic material like compost will dilute your contaminants a great deal over time. A little bit at a time, every time you plant and harvest. And then you want to mulch. You want to prevent airborne soil dust, prevent upsplash. By preventing airborne soil dust, you also, using mulch, you can keep your weeds down, improve your soil water retention, and reduce particles from splashing upward onto your plants, like your leafy greens and your spinaches, your cabbages, your kales, those plants that have deep veins where the soil particles are likely to stick, right? And then you want to prevent upsplash also by subsurface irrigating, right? Don't stand there with a hose and water like this or a sprinkler, right? Mulch your soils, but also you're going to subsurface irrigate with drip irrigation, because we're in California, we're in a drought, right? And that'll also prevent upsplash and the spreading of soil particles. And then you want to manage your pH, get your soil pH tested about once a year, right? Your aim is a neutral pH between a 6 to a 7. Soil pH is a range from 0 to 14. So your goal is a 6 to a 7, unless you're growing blueberries, which like a 5.5 pH. Optimal growth or nutrition, promote good drainage, right? So if you're growing at the bottom of a slope, that's where the potential for soil contaminants to accumulate are. And then in terms of your produce, right? Once you've harvested, you want to soak your produce in a 10% soil vinegar solution. 10% white vinegar will help lift off soil particles, especially on those peaches, those nectarines, those hairy produce fruit crops that are on your trees and shrubs that may not uptake through the soil, through their roots, like leafy greens and root crops might, but actually may get some soil dust because of wind, because of uncovered soil. Maybe it's not you, maybe it's your next door neighbor that has uncovered soils, right? And it was a windy night and now it's 6 in the morning and you've come outside to eat some fresh produce, right? As you get ready for your long, busy day, taking the kids to school, going to work and so forth, right? Getting stuck in traffic in the Bay Area's traffic nightmares. But, you know, you want to wash your produce in 10% white vinegar solution. You want to peel your root crops. That 10% white vinegar solution acts as a surfactant. It'll help lift off the soil particles. And you want to peel your root crops when you know you've got low amounts of soil contaminants in your ambient environment, in your soils, in your yard or farm or garden space. You want to manage your inputs, avoid waste-derived fertilizers. Mostly read the instructions on the package when you're using fertilizers. Try to stick to organic fertilizers if you can. Slow release and water insoluble fertilizers are really helpful, key. They allow for nutrient uptake in small amounts, a little bit at a time. And then knowing your site's history, right? What was it before? Was it a junkyard, a 3 a.m. dumping ground in a rural farm space that's now urbanized over time? Was it an industrial area? Was it a dry cleaner, a gas station? Was there an older home that burnt down or was demolished next door where there might be sources of lead paint and lead piping, right? Remediation is a key thing, only if you're at very high levels. Remediation usually is interpreted as actually removing large amounts of soil and incorporating fresh soils, but that can be very expensive, right? If you only have very low soil contaminant amounts in your soil, then best management practices are really, really key. And following those can help you keep your food family and farm safe, right? Observing your plant growth, get your soil tested, observe whether you have healthy soil organisms like worms. Are your worms glossy and more of like a pinkish color? Or are they more of a beige? Do they look translucent, like somebody changed their oil on the soil with their vehicle, right? On the soil where you're now growing crops in. So be observant, right? Dig in your soil, test your soil, get your soil structure tests done too. Look up your site's history. You can Google Sanborn Maps, SANBORN. Those are public access maps. They'll give you a sense of the site's history. You can walk around, get to know the old timers in your neighborhood, find out what your site was 50 years ago, 30 years ago. Maybe they grew up in the neighborhood, right? Was it a parking lot, an auto repair? Was it a machine shop? Was it a concrete plant or an illegal dumping ground at 3 a.m., right? Ask yourself, is the soil easy to dig into? Are you finding organisms in the soil like healthy worms? Do you come across any plastics, any glass, any metals, any car batteries, any other like Walkman batteries from like the 80s, right? Do a bean test, plant in your soil and plant in some store-bought soil and see how the comparison goes, right? Every site is different. All soils in urban areas are different too. You want to map where you took your soil samples before you send them to get tested, right? So you want to take soils from different areas of your yard space, maybe from the area near your home, if your home was built between before the late 70s, where the legislation changed and lead was no longer put in paint. And also observe where there was evidence of soil contamination. You want to dig, maybe take 5 to 6 samples in your yard space, 4 to 6 inches deep. You want to remove decomposing foliage, small rocks, any kind of debris or twigs, right? And each distinct area should be sampled. Make maps of your front yard, backyard, maybe your side yard if you have one. And you map your garden based on planting areas. Was it vegetables? Was it native plants, perennials, fruit trees? Was that residence at the bottom of this image a building built before 1978, 79 when the lead laws changed, right? Is that old shed to the upper left, was that actually painted with lead paint too or not, right? Was it built afterwards in the mid 80s maybe? And again, what was the site before it was a residential home? Was it a dry cleaner, a gas station, a junkyard, right? What was it before? These Sanborn maps can give you a sense of the history of what it was before, and that's why you need to be your best researcher, neighbor, investigator, and good community educator. Maybe you can educate your neighbors about these issues too. So this is a site worth visiting. This is the North Richmond Farm in North Richmond here in the East Bay. Urban Tilt is a great nonprofit food justice organization that's growing produce in their community. They got their soils tested too. Worth checking them out on a Saturday or letting them know you're interested in coming by and seeing their farm. Another one in Oakland is City Slicker Farms in West Oakland. West Oakland's City Slicker Farm Park is worth visiting also on a Saturday, right? They're open 11 to 5. I believe they're closed on Sundays. And the site used to be a contaminated space, and when it was cleaned up, and now it's an urban farm. So worth checking out, seeing if there's ways you can engage with them, getting a farm tour perhaps. You want to gather the tools you need for your soil testing in advance. You'll need a ruler, some buckets, shovel or trowel, probably a spoon. You'll probably never use the spoon for anything else again. Some quart-sized labeled Ziploc bags, some gloves, maybe a mask if it's a windy day, and then paper to make a map, maybe a clipboard to write on, right? Think about safety while sampling. You want to keep kids from touching the soil and soil dust. Only work with moist soils when you're about to get your soil tested, maybe wet it down the night before. Clean your shoes when done and don't track soil into your home, into your car, right? Also follow safety guidelines. So wear gloves, wear the mask, try not to inhale soil dust, right? Map your spot. So think of this as a diagram of a backyard, right? At the bottom was your house and patio. Maybe it was built before 1978 or 79 and had some lead paint on it. So maybe, these X's are where I'm going to take some soil samples. And you can actually take a small number of samples so you don't spend a lot of money initially unless you have a concern to be concerned about, right? So these X's are where I took samples, but maybe I just took like 3 to 4 total samples, and I took a little bit at each of these X's and I mixed it in a bucket. And from that bucket, I pulled a mixed sample, what's called a composite sample. Hope everybody can say the word composite, right? And composite sample is what you send to the lab. Maybe I pull some additional samples off to the left where there was a gas station or a dry cleaner historically on the property next door to me, in case there's concern about that soil there, right? And then you want to take samples in triplicate. So you might have 3 different buckets where you mix your soils in, right? And pull 3 different samples and you send those to the lab. This could be for a whole yard, just 3 samples. So you keep your money tight near your, in your pocket, not giving it to people you don't need to give it to, because money is rare and, you don't need to share unless you need to. And getting your soils sampled, don't guess, test, really key, right? But getting your samples done in triplicate will give you a sense on whether you did the testing right, whether you have any repetition or concern, right? You want to dig your hole and use a spoon to pull upward from the side, just like this image right here. You're going to pull upward from the side of the hole so that you're pulling from basically where it used to be the layers that were closer to the surface, right? Just like this, you're going to pull upward and you put that into the bucket. You mix those samples in the bucket and you pull from that, again, what's called a composite sample. And then you're going to send it to a soil lab. You can get your soil lab list from the analytical, from the Master Gardener Program's Growing Your Own Food webpage in Alameda. We will send you a follow-up when we send you this PowerPoint with the link to the soil labs list also. And you want to get your soil tested at the very least for pH, percent organic matter, nutrients, heavy metals, petro, and dioxins, right? Petrochemicals are those PAHs we talked about before, otherwise known as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Say that 3 times fast, right? And then all of this is based on your site's history. So you might have to test for other things that you might not have thought of based on your site's history. You're looking up the sandboard maps, getting to know your neighbors, the old timers in your community that know about what the site was before, right? Because neighborhoods change over time, land uses change over time, and there is a chance that your site was a farm or an industrial area before it became a residential area, right? And so looking up your site's history will help you understand what to test for and also help you save money too, right? Soil sampling strategy is going to be based on your site conditions, right? You're going to take samples from 6 to 18 inches. 18 is really more if you're growing deeper fruit trees and shrubs that are woody, right? You're going to take multiple samples from your yard or farm or garden space. You're going to mix them in a bucket called what will then be called a composite sample. So you'll pull your composite sample and you put that in a bag, and that bag will be labeled with the site name, the part of the yard or farm that you took it from, your name, and then the garden's space, right? Essentially your map will give you some labeling ideas. It might be 1A or 2B, right? And your map should be labeled 1A or 2B so that when you go back and you get your test results, you're going to actually know where to look, right? And where you have concerns or no concerns. You're going to tell your soil lab person at the front desk when you drop off your soil lab test sample, or when you send it in the mail to them. You're going to tell them you want to know, you want them to keep the labels and keep the information on your soil bags, sample bags, labels actually on the test result sheets too, so that you know what you're referring to and which part of the yard or farm or garden space you're referring to, right? And again, you're going to mix those subsamples to get a composite sample. You don't have to do too many samples in a yard, but once you know you have some risk, that's when you'll do more testing, right? So again, you're going to map your sample spots. You're going to collect and mix your composite, your subsamples to make a composite sample. You might have to dry it. You might want to find out if your lab actually wants to dry those, get those samples dried by you, or they'll do it themselves. You may have to sift your soil also. Sometimes they'll do it for you. You want to remove and bag that test composite sample and send or deliver it to a lab. That's your sample preparation. Moisten the soils before sampling, so you're avoiding inhaling soil dust, right? Depending on the cases, you might want to discard the top couple of inches of soil when you're pulling your soil sample. You want to remove non-soil materials, especially rocks or anything else that's not natural, or even small twigs. Send it in a plastic labeled Ziploc type bag. 6 to 8 cups might be what your total is pulled from your yard. You're going to mix that, and that's what's going to be what you pull from for your composite sample. You're going to make sure that bag is really well labeled, right? It should have at least the date, what part of the yard or farm space it is. The fancy people like to do GPS, right, and actually get it like geotag, but that's not necessary and can be dependent on you if you have that access to technology, right? You're going to use clean equipment, wear gloves, and maybe a mask, right? And different plant needs will require different sampling. So vegetables, you'll test 6 to 18 inches, turf only 1 to 6 inches, right? Shrubs, small trees, you'll actually go deeper because those roots will go deeper. Deeply rooted trees might be more like a 24-inch depth, right? And again, you're going to pull that spoon upward from the bottom so that you get the side of the hole, and you're getting some samples from soil sample from the side of the hole, right? And that's what you put in your bag. You have 3 different buckets. These are labeled as the triangle, the square, and the circle here, because you're going to do this in each of your sample spots so that you then mix those and you only send 3 bags to the lab. So that's my presentation. I want to thank Alameda and Contra Costa Counties, agriculture and community development agencies, specifically agriculture departments and community development agency in Alameda County for your support and hosting me. And I'm sorry about the technical difficulties early on. And we do ask you to please complete this survey here, poll right now before you get off. And also, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. Thanks so much. And I'm going to defer back to Sony. Thank you for hosting me, Sony. Sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. And thanks again also, April and Joy and Johnny.
Not a problem. And we were able to post a copy of the PDF that had a list of the different labs that was on the Master Gardeners website. So you can go into the chat and download that PDF. And then let's take a moment to see if there's any questions that were asked of the audience. You can either type your questions into the Q&A tab, or you can raise your hand, I believe, and we can unmute you so that you can ask your question directly.
And I'm going to stop share.
All right. And then I know earlier somebody asked, were they going to be able to get a copy of this, either a recording of the webinar or a copy of your slide presentation for references?
Sure, and probably they can get both, and there are other resources available that we'll also send in our mass email to everyone who participated in all the workshops afterwards. It'll include the PowerPoint, the recording. It'll also include a number of links and further reading opportunities.
All right, great.
Wow, so we still have 10 people and no questions up. There was a Q&A. What's that say? No questions, but excellent information. Oh, thank you. Thank you, April. All right. No one has any questions? Let's see who all participated. All right. Hannah, ICM, Jim, Morgan, Paul, Simon, no questions at all? Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having us. Back to you, Sony.
All right, great. So since we have a little bit of time left, what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about some of the programs and resources that we actually offer. I didn't get a chance to finish that when we had started prior. So I'm going to just share my PowerPoint, go over some of the things that Alameda County actually does and provides for the community. All right. Oh, let me see. So we went through a lot of this. Let me just go down to where it talks about our services and resources. Okay, great. So with Alameda County Healthy Homes Department, we actually offer quite a bit to the community and to the public. We have property owner education and different services that might include an in-home consultation. If you just purchased a house, I know that there's a lot of people that are purchasing fixer-uppers, which sounds like a scary thing. But if you plan on doing the work yourself, definitely give us a call, especially if you're doing some exterior, interior work, any type of remodeling of a bathroom or a kitchen. Those areas have a tendency to have higher contents of lead within the walls or the components of the home. Give us a call. We have technical experts on staff, whether they're contractors or environmentalists, that can give you really good advice that's going to be practical, that's going to be cost savings, just to make sure to ensure that your house is lead safe or free of hazards doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to cost a lot of money. So we want to make sure that you're going to be safe and get the advice that you need before you actually start pounding on and knocking down walls. The next thing, we have some lead hazard reduction grants, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but we do have some of those grants available to not just help you with the lead, but actually to get rid of it, to remediate some of the sources of the lead hazards. We have lead safety education and training. We just provided a training yesterday, which was an RRP federal EPA training, which stands for renovation, remodel, and painting. It's a requirement if you're planning to do any type of work on a property that's built before 1978 and you're doing it for some type of compensation. So even if you're a landlord and your form of compensation is that you're getting rents, but you have to repair some of the plumbing in a unit, you are required to have at least that one-day training. And so that's a training that we actually offer for free for residents and property owners, as well as work and maintenance crews of Alameda, Berkeley, Oakland, and Emeryville. We also have some minor home repair grants that are available. These are different from the lead hazard repair grants. These are mainly for, there's some eligibility requirements. A lot of them are for seniors, and they're dependent upon what city you live in, or if it's in an unincorporated county of Alameda. The amounts are different. They can range anywhere between $1,400 all the way up to $3,800, $3,900. And that's for little small minor repairs to ensure that your house and your home has that there aren't any health and safety issues. And if there are, we have, again, just a small pool of funding to help fix that, where we'll actually have a contractor come out, do an assessment, and then the contractor will do the work. We'll pay that contractor directly. We also do case management of lead poisoned children, as well as environmental assessments. So again, we want to encourage everybody, if you have a child, especially if they're under 6 years old and you live in an older home, get your child tested. Get them tested at least at 1 and 2 years of age. If they've never been tested before, get them tested one time before they turn 6 years old. We want to make sure that we have that baseline to know where their blood lead levels are, so that if there is any levels of exposure, we can intervene quickly and hopefully get that reversed as soon as possible. And then we also have healthy homes education. Earlier in my presentation, I talked a little bit about how we're starting to expand our horizons, not with just lead poisoning, but with other household environmental hazards that could constitute or contribute to the poor health or the safety of the occupants. And so I want to talk a little bit about this grant funding, because this is a new pool of funding that we received through HUD. And what the grant includes is up to $10,000 per property unit. And so that means if you own a duplex, or if you live in a duplex, that duplex is eligible not for just $10,000, but $20,000, because it's 2 actual units. If it's a fourplex, that's $40,000 worth of grant funding that does not need to get paid back. Because of COVID, we have quite a bit of money still remaining, and we want to make sure that we do get this money out to the public so that people can have some assistance in ensuring that where they live is going to be lead free or lead safe. So the housing does need to be built before 1960. The family has to be low income. And when I say family, I mean the occupants. If you're a landlord and you're actually renting the property out, it has nothing to do with your income. It has everything to do with the occupant's income, because ultimately HUD wants to make sure that those tenants and those occupants that are low income are able to live and thrive in a safe environment. And so this is for low income individuals. We also have an additional funds for other healthy housing needs. And so these are minor repairs. If your water heater isn't working, if you have some wobbly stair rails, if there's some lighting that is missing in the back or leading up to the front and could be a trip and fall hazard, those are things that we want to fix as well, in addition to the lead hazards. And then every single grant includes a free lead risk assessment. And so what that risk assessment entails is that we'll have a third party environmental company come out and test the property. They'll test the inside, the outside, the soil, the paint, the dust, to find out in actuality, does your property contain lead? And then not only does it contain lead, there's a difference between having lead-based paint versus having a lead-based paint hazard. And so if the paint is actually chipping, peeling, deteriorated, or in poor condition, that constitutes a hazard, versus just having paint in good condition, but it's sealed in the underlying layers of the paint. That means that you do have lead on your property, but it's not a concern, it's not a hazard, and it's not going to pose as a risk to the occupants. And finally, these grants are available countywide. So it doesn't matter what city you live in, as long as you live in Alameda County. And then to the right, I have some pictures. These are actual photos of some of the projects that we've done. And so the top ones, you can see a before and after. Actually, it's a during and an after of a house that we painted on the outside. And what we do is we hire the contractors. We make sure that they are state certified and trained in lead safe work practices to ensure that they're doing the work properly. We actually monitor and manage the project. And then we also do a clearance testing before the occupants are able to come back in. And so we want to make sure that the project is done correctly and properly for the health and safety of everyone. The grants also include some minor soil remediation, which includes basically landscaping. If you have bare soil that is a concern, we can put some mulch around it. We can put some pebble rocks, some sod, moss, anything that actually uses landscaping or ground covering to seal in contaminated lead soil, so that it again protects the occupants from any type of exposure. And then finally, the third photo again is a before and after of one of our happy customers, clients, who actually was able to take advantage of the grant funding. And so this funding is only going to last, and it's based on a first come, first serve basis. If your property is built before 1960, please give us a call. It's there's absolutely no obligation to sign up and get more information about it. And so we want to make sure that everybody has access to this funding. Even if you're a tenant, give us a call. We can always talk with your landlord to see if this is something that they'd be willing to sign up for. And then finally, I just wanted to point you over to our website. Down here at the bottom, our website is www.achhd.org. Again, it's www.achhd.org. And I want to make sure that if you go on there, go to our e-subscribe page, sign up to get all the latest and greatest information of what's going on, some of our giveaways, where we're going to be in the community. Whenever we have new grants available, you're going to be the first to find out and the first to know. And then also we have links to our social media pages. And so I believe we have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have LinkedIn, we have, what are some of the other social medias that we have? Don't let me start. But you can, we actually have links to everything at the bottom of our website. So please definitely go visit our website. It is National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. And so this week it's our job to just make sure that the community is aware that we're here for you, and we have a wealth of information that's available. Okay, let me just check the chat to see if there are any other questions. All right, so I don't see any other questions, and I think I can give everybody at least 10 more minutes back to their lives. If you have any